See you. I'm Sarah Marshall. I'm the director of the Kent Memorial Library. Thank you for joining us as we celebrate the great town of Kent. The library is fortunate to have so many generous supporters who have helped us raise the funds necessary to meet our budget for the year. Since we can't have a party, this series is our way of thanking you for pitching in. We are offering 6 fabulous programs, all free, from some of our local luminaries that showcase the variety of interesting and talented people we have in our precious town. Of course, we are always happy to receive any donations you feel compelled to share. We are so grateful to all the friends of the Kent Memorial Library. Helping us tonight is our technology point person, Amanda Myers. Please let us know if you have any tech issues and we will try to resolve them. Housekeeping items first. We will mute everyone and show everyone's video during this presentation. If you are experiencing technical difficulties, please type it in the chat, which there should be a little box at the bottom of your screen there, and Amanda will connect with you to troubleshoot. We will save time at the end for Q&A. If you have a question, please type your question into the chat and we will ask the question. I will ask the question on your behalf. Tonight's program is The Pope, the Shaykh, and a Rabbi Go into the KML. What's New in Jewish, Christian, Muslim Dialogue, presented by Rabbi Burton Visotzky. Kent resident Rabbi Burt Visotzky will report on the developments in dialogue among Jews, Catholics, Protestants, Muslims, and other major religious groups, and how dialogue and interfaith cooperation help to advance development and bring an end to violence and poverty. Burt Visotzky serves as director of the Milstein Center for Interreligious Dialogue at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York. In that role, he engages international leaders in interreligious dialogue. He will report on developments in interfaith engagement from his perspective as a member of the United Nations Multi-Faith Advisory Council and as a member of the Board of Governors of the International Jewish Committee for Interreligious Consultations. In the past year, he has attended such consultations at the Vatican and in Abu Dhabi, which I'm mispronouncing, Burt, just for you. We'll see you next Wednesday, July 15th at 7 o'clock when the Masters of Kent returns with Time Comes Appreciation, a visit with actress Margot Martindale. But now, please join me in welcoming Rabbi Burt Visotzky.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sarah Marshall, who I tried to convince that she should pronounce Abu Dhabi, but she wasn't going to go for it. I especially want to thank the Kent Memorial Library, that's the KML. I was going to title my talk, The Pope, the Shaykh, and a Rabbi Go into a Bar, but I realized the Shaykh wouldn't go into a bar, so at least I got them into the Kent Memorial Library. I want to thank Sarah Marshall and Lucy Pierpont and Amanda for setting this up. I would be remiss if I did not thank the co-presidents of the Kent Memorial Library, Jim Blackketter and Sandra Edelman, whom some of you know is my wife. And I do also want to recognize some of the VIPs. I don't know if they're all on the call, but some of the VIPs who registered for tonight. My in-laws, Phyllis and Jerry Edelman, they are unbelievably faithful in showing up at my talks. And they have come often enough to the same talk I've given multiple times and miraculously stay awake for it each time. In addition, I want to welcome, I'm looking around the screen that I can see, a number of my relatives, including my brother-in-law and my cousin Leah and other cousins. So it's just very nice. And of course, my wonderful students who I feel like I can actually command them to come on these calls, but they really are extraordinarily wonderful and loyal, including, I think I saw him on the call, one of my students who's currently in Berlin. So he's up late. And you, Sammy, if you're watching, you can feel free to fall asleep. I also, on the list of people, I saw my colleague, Ausa Karam. Ausa, who you'll also see in the photo session at the end, is the current Secretary General of Religions for Peace International, a interfaith organization in 90 countries. It's the largest interfaith organization in the world. I think I see her there wearing a mask, my colleague Ruth Messenger. If she's on the call, I also want to welcome Irina Faskianos, the Vice President of the Council on Foreign Relations. My old pal, I'm looking right at him, Yechezkel Landau, who is, I suppose I can say this now, one of the grandfathers of interfaith dialogue, and is somebody we all look up to and learn from. And one of my study buddies and colleagues, the Reverend Lisa Jenkins. Lisa is the minister of St. Matthew's Baptist Church in Harlem. So she is a neighbor of the Jewish Theological Seminary in Harlem, and I'm always happy to work with her. Finally, as I very unexpectedly see on the call, I see Harold Jacobson, my old buddy. And he and his wife are right there on the call. Wonderful to see you. They've been supporters of my Jewish Theological Seminary for literally decades. And I'm always grateful. He's a good dialogue partner. In a little while, after I kind of give you the lay of the land, we will show some slides. It's going to be a little bit like seeing my vacation slides, but you'll indulge me. I want to start with a story. A number of years ago, I was talking to a reporter about interfaith dialogue. And the reporter said to me, you know, Rabbi, you're talking to all these people. You're a Jew. You're talking to Christians. You're talking to Muslims. It's all kumbaya. So I was a little taken aback. First of all, because growing up, I always thought kumbaya was a good thing. We'd sing it around a campfire. But I couldn't help but ask him, so tell me, if you had a choice between kumbaya and people shooting one another, which would you prefer? And he actually had the grace to blush and said, my editor would prefer shooting every time. And that's a little bit what we're up against, is the problem that editors prefer shooting. And people don't generally report on all of the good things that are going on internationally, nationally, locally, in interreligious dialogue, and beyond dialogue, in interreligious cooperation to make the world a better place. So I'm here to tell you that there's lots of it going on, and I'm here to tell you precisely because you won't read about it in the media. One of the things I realized with my colleagues, almost all of whom are clergy, is that most of them, unlike me, actually have a pulpit. And so we are determined to use our pulpits to share the good news that there is enormous interreligious dialogue and enormous interreligious engagement and cooperation going on to address the burning issues of our day. And when I say burning issues, I'm talking about COVID-19. I'm talking about poverty. I'm talking about homelessness. I'm talking about food insecurity. Religious leaders join together on all of those issues and more to advance humanity. We all feel that we are commanded by God to make the world a better place, and damn, we're going to do it. And we like to do it together. So I want to share with you kind of the overview of what's going on out there. And necessarily, it'll be a limited overview. I can't possibly account for everything that is going on in interreligious dialogue. There's just too much. So I'm going to talk about mostly what I'm involved in. And I want to be clear, I am a rabbi. I am the director of the Milstein Center for Interreligious Dialogue and a professor at the Jewish Theological Seminary. So there I am at the Conservative Movement Seminary. And we are a prestigious institution. It's given me entree to many places. We represent almost 2,000 rabbis worldwide, and we have our rabbis in North and South America, in Europe, and in Israel. So we have reach, and in that reach, we reach out to our colleagues in churches, mosques, all over the world so that we can cooperate in these kind of efforts. When I'm done giving my kind of tour of what I'm involved in and what's going on, I will show you a couple of dozen slides, and you'll see who some of the actors are in these works. And I'm going to try and characterize what I do on three levels. One is local, and local, I'm going to kind of I live in two worlds. Except for COVID-19, most of the time, I live during the week in New York City, and on weekends up here in Kent, Connecticut. The virus has given me the incredibly wonderful privilege of spending the last 4 months full-time in Kent. So I'm really happy to be here with my colleagues and my family. And I'm going to talk about the fact that we have friends in Kent as well as in New York with whom we do this kind of stuff. So let me just start with the fact that in New York City, churches, synagogues, and mosques, almost every one of them, they can be Catholic churches, they can be Protestant churches, almost every one of them these days engage in some kind of interfaith dialogue. And I just want to give you two quick examples of things I have done with JTS, with our local colleagues in New York City, and then I'll talk about Kent. Many years ago now, we did a wonderful experiment with the Jewish members of the community at the Jewish Theological Seminary, and literally right across Central Park, the 96th Street Mosque. And we decided that members of the seminary, I'm going to start calling it JTS, the Jewish Theological Seminary, JTS. Folks from JTS joined together once a month with folks from the mosque, Muslims obviously, and together we went to the Presbyterian Church on 114th Street. Partly we wanted to have a media trifecta. We thought that they couldn't resist reporting if we had Jews, Muslims, and Christians all working together. And indeed, what we did was the Presbyterian Church at 114th Street has a soup kitchen. So we would work together to serve New York's hungry. The interesting and expected side effect was literally we would spend an hour or two stripping collard greens and cooking them and doing things like that. And while you do that, you just trade your life stories. So one of the results was that the Jews and the Muslims and the Christians in the kitchen got to know one another, got to know one another's families, and broke down the normal barriers that we have. Another example, much more recently, and I mentioned her earlier, was my colleague Lisa Jenkins. Lisa is I almost said the rabbi, the minister at a Baptist church in Harlem, and she noticed a few weeks ago that members of her church were not wearing masks, and she was concerned about them. So we collaborated, and I had enough funding that we could work together, and Lisa decided that she would reach out also to the city and the county. And between us, Lisa was able at her church to give testing to almost 600 members of her congregation. We gave out masks, we gave out gloves, we gave out sanitizer. I'm sure in some cases, literally saving lives because some of the people proved positive. And it's a very simple example of how we cooperate within our own community, Jews and blacks together, to make sure that everybody is safe and healthy. Up here in Kent, I've had the pleasure of working with, now talk about a pleasure, he's now retired, Roger White from I think it's the Episcopal Church in town, and also with one of my buddies in New Milford, the Reverend Jack Gilpin. As it happens, Jack Gilpin and I were in a New York City Bible study group together for many, many years. So it's nice to have a New York and New Milford friend. And it's just one more opportunity that all of us have. I would be remiss, I mentioned Yechezkel Landau, if I didn't talk about one of the premier institutions in Connecticut, which is the Hartford Theological Seminary. Yechezkel was a professor there for many years, and Hartford, in addition to training Christian clergy, has a Jewish professor on its staff, and much more impressive, about 30% of its student body in the chaplaincy program are Muslim. So it's a wonderful melting pot in Hartford to see Muslims, Christians, and Jews. I had the privilege a number of years ago of even speaking at their commencement, working together to make the world a better place. I want to shift a little bit to the national scene and share with you what's going on, again, from my Jewish perspective. I am the academic advisor to something that's called the National Council of Synagogues. When it originated, it was a group of Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionists, and Orthodox rabbis who met with the exact purpose of doing outreach to the Christian community. Alas, Jews don't always get along with one another. We argue a lot, that's who we are. And the Orthodox colleagues dropped out. So now the National Council of Synagogues is made up of Reform Reconstructionist, and conservative, the progressive Jewish wings of the Jewish community. And I dare say that those progressive wings of the Jewish community also represent the vast majority of Jews who are affiliated with synagogues. And we meet regularly as a council with representatives of the National Council of Churches. For those of you that don't know, the National Council of Churches is representative of mainline Protestant. So yes, they are shrinking, the mainline Protestants, but they are still very active and very engaged, and we work together with them all the time on issues of the day. The other group we work with is the U.S. Council of Catholic Bishops. We work with the bishops all the time. One of the bishops is particularly assigned to have relations with the Jewish community. That's his portfolio. Not so long ago, the chair or president of the U.S. Council of Catholic Bishops was my own hometown Archbishop Cardinal Timothy Dolan. And Timothy Dolan is a wonderful example of someone we work with. I probably disagree ideologically with everything Timothy Dolan says. That said, Tim Dolan said, you know, we got to get beyond a dialogue of grievance. There's so much of God's work we need to do together. And I cannot disagree on that. He's absolutely right. And he has led the way for us to work together. I say this fully cognizant of the fact that before 1965, before the Second Vatican Council, what's called Vatican II, the church and Jews were enemies of one another. The church blamed Jews for killing Christ. Jews, of course, suffered terribly, whether it was under the Inquisition, the Crusades, the Holocaust. And for the church in 1965 to have completely turned around its theology, yes, as probably a result of the Holocaust, but still an enormous, enormous effort, first with the Catholics and almost simultaneously with the Protestants, to do outreach to the Jewish community, so that throughout Europe, communities that were utterly destroyed are now regrouping and regrowing, and doing that with the cooperation of the local Christian communities. That is an enormously powerful thing. But I'm not talking about Europe yet. I'm still talking about the United States. So let me say that we are familiar with anti-Semitism. If I say the Anti-Defamation League, most of you know, you can be Christian or Jewish, you know that it defends Jews against anti-Semitism. A number of years ago, I was privileged to be one of the founding board members, and I remain a board member of an organization called Shoulder to Shoulder. Shoulder to Shoulder is 36 organizations, virtually all of which are Jewish and Christian, that are joined together for the purpose of opposing Islamophobia and oppression of American Muslims. Of course, some of you know enough American history to know that there have been Muslims on this continent before there was a United States of America. Well before 1776, there were Muslims. And I have had the privilege nationally of even attending a Ramadan Iftar dinner, a breakfast dinner in the White House when Barack Obama was president, because we do Iftar dinners as part and parcel of the way in which we welcome the Muslim community. But we stand with the Muslim community and we oppose incidents of Islamophobia, because we know only too well that if they can attack Muslims, they can attack Jews, they can attack Sikhs, they can attack Catholics. I'm old enough to remember when Jack Kennedy ran for president and some of the horrific anti-Catholic slurs we heard in those days. So I just want to be very clear on the record. We stand up for each other, and we do stand shoulder to shoulder because we actually think that's the American way. So I've been talking about some of the national organizations I'm involved with. I've worked very closely and proudly with the Islamic Society of North America. ISNA, the Islamic Society of North America, is the largest umbrella group of Muslims in the country. Every year they have a convention. a number of years ago on July 4th weekend. I was invited to Washington, D.C. to their convention. They had 30,000 Muslims at the Washington Convention Center, and they gave me a name tag that was in like 36-point type, Rabbi Visotzky. So there was no hiding for me. Everybody knew who I was. I was wearing a yarmulke on my head, and virtually every Muslim I passed said the same thing to me. They said, "Assalamu alaikum, Rabbi. We are so glad you are here." And I have to say, I was glad to be there. I'm involved with the American Jewish Committee's Muslim Jewish Advisory Committee in New York. I'm involved with a group of 30-somethings. Madison, pay attention. This is your age group. 30-somethings called the Jewish Muslim Solidarity Committee. And they have get-togethers probably 2-3 times a month, everything from working for Habitat for Humanity, sharing meals together. I was involved with them. I actually did Hanukkah in a mosque. You can only imagine how much fun they have. And it's just a wonderful way for Jewish and Muslim kids, 30-somethings, 20-somethings, to get to know one another. I am a member of the Council of Centers for Christian-Jewish Relations, which has been around for decades. And I'm very proud to say that a Catholic university, Merrimack College, in 2012 gave me an award called the Gold Seer Award, which is a Catholic college giving a Jewish rabbi an award for his work with the Muslim community. And to me, that is what America needs to be. That's what freedom of religion is. Not just that we are free to preach and go to our own church or synagogue or mosque, but that we are free to visit one another's churches and synagogues and mosques. Many years ago, I was invited by the imam of the 96th Street Mosque to preach on Friday in his mosque. And I went, and I preached to about 1,000 Muslims in the audience, every color of the rainbow, and pretty much every socioeconomic group you could imagine. At the end of my talk, people crowded around, and one Muslim, a real New Yorker, got right up in my face. And as only a New Yorker could do, he said to me, "Why are you here, Rabbi?" I was a little startled. I didn't expect that question. I had already spoke. I almost sang Kumbaya, but I didn't know what to say. So I said the first thing, of course, that came into my head, which is not generally a good thing to do diplomatically. But I said, "Well, I'm here because you're my neighbor." And he thought about it. He said, "Oh, well, that's really good. Thanks." And I realized, like, well, that is the right answer, because I am your neighbor. Across the street from my JTS, there is a liberal Protestant seminary, Union Theological Seminary. It's where I first went as a student to learn Greek, a painful experience, but still. And I have been on the faculty as an adjunct at Union Seminary since 1980. And I'm very proud to be part of that faculty. There have been other Jewish faculty members there before me, most notably, and I'm going to have to take a pause because I can't say my name and his in the same breath, but well before me, Abraham Joshua Heschel taught on the faculty of Union Theological Seminary. I've also been involved literally for decades with a Presbyterian seminary called Auburn Theological Seminary, and Auburn Seminary has as its raison to do and to train interreligious dialogue leaders. Now let me talk internationally about what's going on. And I want to say a couple of institutions, Sarah was kind enough to mention them in the introduction, but they seem unlikely to people because the two institutions in some ways almost embody secularism. One is the United Nations, 193 nations that very rarely agree on anything. But if they agree on one thing, it has seemed to be, at least in the first 60 years of the UN, it's been around, the charter is going to celebrate its 75th anniversary, that religion has no place here. But in the last 10, 15 years, there has been something called the Interagency Task Force for Religion and Development, IATFRD. The UN loves initials. And the UN has now developed a multi-faith advisory council. I'm very proud to be one of the founding members of that advisory council, and 20 different UN entities take our advice on issues, because guess what? They finally realize that everywhere around the world, if there's trouble or if there's good, religion is somehow involved. When they go to the poorest of the poor in Africa or Asia, who's there feeding the hungry and the poor? Religious leaders. When there is incitement to violence in so many places in the world, who's unfortunately doing the inciting? Often enough, religious leaders. So not only am I a member of the Multi-Faith Advisory Council, but I am a member of the UN Office of the Special Advisor for the Prevention of Genocide. And he's an Undersecretary General of the UN, my friend, a Muslim, Adama Dieng. And I sit on Dieng's steering committee because we have a plan of action from the United Nations to oppose the kind of speech that incites violence and can lead to genocide. And we are in all 7 regions of the world. We gather together people of all religious leadership so that we can stand united and say, this is not going to happen on our watch. Sometimes we're even successful at it. Not always, but sometimes. And for me, even if I know that it's 1 out of 100, that's enough for me to be involved. Because if you can prevent violence and you can prevent genocide, that is your job. I also was privileged to serve on the initial roundtable of religious advisors at the World Bank. Now, the World Bank seems about as secular as you can get. But the immediate past president of the World Bank, Jim Young Kim, a Korean American. Jim Kim is a physician, but his mother, not coincidentally, was a minister who had her own degree from Union Theological Seminary. So Jim Kim was very, very convinced, literally from day one, of the value of religion. He grew up in a religious Christian household, and he was very happy to invite religious leaders from all of the denominations and all of the religions you can imagine to be part of his advisory council. And again, Jim Kim, the World Bank, actually does development work and goes in and tries to eradicate poverty. I wore my nice Zoom shirt today. Other times I wear a t-shirt that says end poverty, which I got from the World Bank because that's kind of their job. And they've come to realize that one of the most effective ways of ending poverty is working with the religious relief organizations. I mentioned earlier, I saw Ruth Messenger on the call. Ruth is the past president of the American Jewish World Service, one of the major organizations that works all over the world to help end poverty and lift people up. Ruth, you took your mask off. I see you now. And I want to salute you. I'm not only so proud to work with Ruth, but I happily count her as one of my rabbis. She's not actually a rabbi, but for me, she's a rabbi. I mentioned also earlier that my colleague Ausa Karam at least registered for the call. Ausa runs this organization, Religions for Peace. It's in 90 different countries. Each country has its own local one. So there's a Religion for Peace USA, but Ausa has the headache of overseeing all 90 countries internationally. And they are out there, again, not just dialoguing, but on the ground, doing projects, making sure that we do, as we would say, as Ausa certainly, as a Muslim would say, inshallah, God willing, we do the things that are expected of us as religious leaders. I'm also involved with the Parliament of the World's Religions. I think I saw Cornelia Dalton on the call. She came up with me to Toronto one day to see the zillion people who show up every 5 to 7 years when the Parliament meets. And it's eye-popping to see every imaginable religion in the world represented at the Parliament. There is, just like there's a National Council for Christians and Jews, there's an International Council. And then there are, of course, Vatican II institutions. The Vatican has a series of colleges for almost each denomination in the Catholic world. So the Gregorian University, for instance, is the Jesuit university. That is actually where Pope Francis was a graduate. And the Angelicum, the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas, so they call it the Angelicum, is a Dominican college of the papal system. And for those of you that know Jewish history, the Jesuits and the Dominicans had a large hand in persecuting Jews in the Middle Ages. So it is kind of a delicious irony, or maybe God's hand at work, that the Gregorian and the Angelicum are the two places in the papal system that actually have Jewish studies programs as part of their training of priests. And I have had the privilege in 2007 and again in 2014, first teaching at the Gregorian and then teaching at the Angelicum. And it's just a wonderful, humbling experience, not only to teach priests in formation and training and graduate students, but each time I was there, I was given the privilege of meeting first Pope Benedict and then Pope Francis. Sarah, I think you mentioned that I am on the board of governors of IJKIC, the International Jewish Committee for Interreligious Consultations. Isn't that in the bio I gave you? Just nod your head yes, it's good. So IJKIC is one of the least known organizations in the Jewish world. It's bad enough that it's got a funny acronym, IJKIC, but the truth is nobody even knows it exists. In 1965, as I said, the Vatican changed their relations with the Jewish people, and they appointed a Cardinal Archbishop to be in charge of relations with the Jews. But in 1968-69, that Cardinal came to a number of Jewish organizations, the American Jewish Committee, the Anti-Defamation League, places like that, and said, please, we have a problem here. You know, the church, the Catholic Church is a hierarchy. We have one pope. He can't meet with every Jew in the world. Please help us out. So we formed the committee called IJKIC. It's made up of a couple of dozen Jewish organizations. As you might imagine, we meet monthly to talk about issues. And because it's everybody from Orthodox to Reform and everything in between, and it represents Jews all over the world, as you can imagine, when we meet just the Jews in the room, we argue constantly. Because that's what we do, and then we reach a decision. And then when we face outward, whether it's with the World Council of Churches or with the Vatican, we speak in one voice. And I have been to consultations with the Vatican. We're constantly in touch with the World Council of Churches. We are opening relations with the World Evangelical Alliance and with the Greek Orthodox. And I was brought onto the board of governors to open relations with the Muslim world as well. So we want to have, speaking for Jews around the world, not only a relationship of where we can dialogue when we have problems, but again, to build programs we can do together. Among those programs, one of my colleagues from the US, a Muslim, was very involved in building something called the Marrakesh Declaration and the Alliance of Virtue. I was there in Marrakesh in 2016 when Muslim leaders, political and religious leaders from all over the world gathered to sign a declaration saying that non-Muslims in Muslim-majority countries, non-Muslims have citizen rights and rights to their religion. That included Saudis, that included Emiratis. I mean, you kind of name it. There were Muslims from all over the world. And it was a huge step forward. Why did they do this? Why did they grant these rights to non-Muslims? Two reasons. The first reason is Muslims in America were really very tired of hearing people say, why should we give you rights? We don't have rights in a Muslim country. So they decided to remedy that. But the second and more important religious reason was very simple. They said, we do it because the Prophet did it. And indeed, the Prophet Muhammad was very open to having relations with the Christians and the Jews. Muhammad was so open to relations with the Jews that two of his wives were Jewish. So, and you know, that's a pretty good way to have interfaith relations. I've been involved, and we'll see pictures with the Gulen Turks. Some of you know that Fethullah Gulen helped really bring Islam back into the mainstream of what had been secular Turkish society. And then the man he supported, Erdogan, turned on him, and Gulen is now living in the United States. If he goes back to Turkey, he will be executed for the sin of having built hospitals and schools and a network of pious Muslims. I'm involved even with the King Abdullah Interfaith Center for Interreligious and Intercultural Dialogue. It is the child of the Saudis, the Austrians, the Spanish, and the Vaticans. Now, none of those groups are traditionally lovers of Jews, but for the last 20 years, they have been supporting Jewish dialogue. There are rabbis on their board of directors. I have to say that when the Saudis killed Khashoggi, that was a horrible moment, but Qaisid, as we call it, the King Abdullah Interfaith Center, Qaisid has survived it, and I am very respectful. Actually, I think I saw my colleague Naomi Kalish on the call. You're right there. And Naomi is a Qaisid fellow who has spent time with them and learned from them. I also want to say that in Qatar, in the city of Doha, if you know Qatar at all, you know that's where Al Jazeera is located. In Qatar, they have something called the Doha Interfaith Center for Interreligious Dialogue. The Arabs who are not particularly good English speakers like the acronym, so they call it the Doha International Center for Interreligious Dialogue, and when they abbreviate it, they say deicide. So you say, like, well, you really shouldn't use that as an abbreviation. Well, why not? I said, well, because it means killing God. Oh, no, it means the center. Like, okay, I'm not going to argue with you, but there it is. When we first went to Qatar, they were very welcoming to the Jewish community. And then, first of all, there's a new emir. Second of all, things change. And the second time I went, 5 years later, it was not welcome at all. I heard diatribe the whole time, and I have not been back since. So I say that to you to tell you point blank, dialogue doesn't always work. It's not always successful. Sometimes even with the best faith efforts, you simply fail. I just want to mention one last one because we're going to see a picture of it. Sandy, who's sitting here in the corner, who is the co-president of the library, Sandy came with me to Muscat, Oman. Why did we go all the way to Oman? Because it was neutral turf, so that we could meet with Pakistanis who crossed the bay to come to Oman, while we flew all the way around the world. But actually had an incredibly successful meeting with the Pakistanis. Some of you know, if you read the papers, that politically, U.S.-Pakistan relations are lousy. But religiously, of all the ironies, even with the most right-wing of the Muslims in Pakistan, we all talk to each other and get along pretty well and try and do programs together. So I think with that, many of you probably have questions already, but keep them for another few moments. And we're going to spend a few minutes. Amanda will start putting photos up with screen sharing, and I will just play the game of telling you who you're seeing pictures of, so that it's not just another picture. This is my friend. He was the Pope's ambassador to the United Nations. His name is Archbishop Bernadito Ausa. Barney Ausa has just retired from being the papal nuncio to the United Nations, and I believe is now serving in Spain. As you may be able to see by looking at him, he is a Filipino by birth and was enormously influential in helping the church at the time of the Philippine hurricanes and floods, in helping his parishes survive. Next. Amanda, should I just go bing? Here I am. You can see young me. I still had, well, first of all, I still had hair. But second of all, my hair was even still dark. There I am. I think it's in 2005 in Doha, Qatar. I'm sitting in between two sheikhs, and then you can see the guy with the red yarmulke, two away from me, is actually an archbishop. And it was just a fascinating time for me to go, as it were, into the belly. It's in the Persian Gulf, and everybody around me, the whole country obviously is Muslim. We went and we were interviewed on Al Jazeera, and they actually treated us like we were rock stars. We walked out of that room, and there were paparazzi waiting to take pictures. Rabbi in Qatar, who would have thunk? Next. Here I am with a man I esteem highly. This is Archbishop O'Malley. He is the Cardinal Archbishop of Boston. He is also on Pope Francis's advisory board. Pope Francis, some of you know, unique for popes, has developed an advisory board. And O'Malley represents U.S. interests there. And he's just a wonderfully humane human being. The picture was taken at Merrimack College. He came to cheer me on as I received that Gold Seer Award for my Muslim work. So again, it tells you about a Cardinal Archbishop who's close to the Pope, who wants there to be good relations with the Muslim world as well. Next. Here we are in Oman. You might be able to tell the guy in the white is a Pakistani. The woman next to him, who's wearing a hijab, is his wife. What you probably cannot see is she was 7 months pregnant at the time. And it was her first time out of Pakistan. Because they went out of Pakistan after a great deal of family debate, she took off. She otherwise would have her face covered. And she decided she could be liberal and just wear head to foot hijab. And as it turned out, they were the same age as my children, and we clicked. So I still have good friends now with, as it were, a surrogate grandchild there in Pakistan from that meeting. The man in the middle who's wearing the collar and the purple is the bishop, hear it, bishop of Pakistan. I said to him, Sammy, I didn't even know there were Christians in Pakistan. He said, yes, there aren't a lot of us. And I confess to you that a lot of my job is doing business with the Taliban. I said, Archbishop, why would you do business with the Taliban? And he looked me straight in the eye and he said, because I don't want my parishioners to get beheaded. And he wasn't joking. So if I talk to you about doing interfaith dialogue so we can put food on someone's table, Sammy is doing interfaith dialogue literally to keep his Christians alive in Pakistan. Next. I am standing in the synagogue of the Jewish Theological Seminary. And as you may see, the ark is open and I have a Torah scroll unwrapped in front of me. And I'm surrounded by 5 gentlemen who are each of them Indonesian. Now, many people don't know this, but Indonesia is actually the largest Muslim population country in the world. There are more Muslims in Indonesia than there are in all of Arab Islam combined. And I'm very pleased that they came to JTS because their track record on Judaism has not been good. There aren't a lot of Jews in Indonesia. So they have been doing outreach. They are doing the outreach to get to know Jews. They've been bringing leaders to Indonesia because they want to change the narrative and make their Muslims understand that getting along with the Jewish community is also part of Islam. Next. I mentioned him earlier. That's my buddy, Archbishop Timothy Cardinal Dolan. Dolan has his arm around me and is laughing because I served him a beer at dinner. After he gave his talk, which was marvelous, unthinkingly, I gave him a kiss on the cheek. And of course, I didn't show it here, but of course, someone got a photo of it. And that was the picture in all the Catholic papers. So I guess it's good for Jewish-Christian dialogue. Next. Here I am with a Pakistani colleague. Her name is Dr. Amini Hote. She is literally a tribal princess from Pakistan, but she also happens to have done her doctorate at the University of Cambridge in England. She's obviously, actually most Pakistanis are fluent in English. Her dad, who was Pakistan's ambassador to England for a while, now lives in DC. And Amini and I are actually in the Grand Mosque at Abu Dhabi at an interfaith dialogue event. Amini and I see each other mostly at these dialogue events in Madrid, in Abu Dhabi, et cetera, and I count her as a very good friend. It's quite a wonderful thing to be able to have friends who live around the world, and we look out for each other. Next. Here I am with, this is his title, Hoca Efendi. Some of you might know the Turkish title, Effendi. Hoca Efendi means a real Effendi. He is a superhero. This is Fethullah Gulen. As I said, he is under a death sentence by the current leadership of Turkey, but he is a great Turkish leader of Islam, and one of his tenets absolutely is that everything they do in an interfaith environment. For those of you that know Turkey, you know that Istanbul had, when it was Constantinople, has a Christian history, it has a Muslim history, and for those of you that may not know, it also has had a Jewish community for probably 1,000 years. So Gulen is just a beautiful man, and I hope he lives long. He's just pushing 80 now, and he's not been well. And it was a very memorable evening I spent with him in rural Pennsylvania, where he is hiding out. Next. Here I am with Cardinal Koch. Cardinal Koch is Austrian by birth. He is the Pope's man to have religious relations with the Jews. I was proud to host him at my Jewish Theological Seminary in 2011, and in fact, that's when that picture's from. And I saw him just last year at the Vatican, and we continue to work together. Among other things I'm grateful to Cardinal Koch for is that he has allowed me to meet the Pope on more than one occasion. Next. This is my friend. I can now call her a friend. She is the 2011 Nobel Peace Prize winner from Liberia, Lema Gbowie. Lema stood up against the tyrants of Liberia, Charles Taylor, by uniting the Christian and the Muslim women to have a sex strike. They told their men, you fight, no sex. You stop fighting, we might get back into bed with you. And surprise, surprise, it worked. And for that, Lema got a Nobel Prize. I have to say, with all props, I would not be friendly with Lema or have been able to bring her to JTS were it not for my colleague Ruth Messenger. So thank you, Ruth. Next. Here I am. That's me in the background. And the woman in the beige sweater is Ausa Karam, the head of Religions for Peace. And the woman in the vermilion sari is Sadhviji Bhagawati Saraswati. She works at an ashram in India, and she is the leader of the WASH Alliance. WASH is a organization that provides clean water and sanitation for people all over India and now all over the world. And Sadhviji, literally, her work saves lives every single day. 2 years ago, on the New Year, the Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah, Sadhviji was in New York. She came to the synagogue with me, and over all of her gowns, she put on a talit as well, so she could blend in. So, I'm so blessed to have friends like this, and I truly count them friends. Sadhviji has been to my home for a holiday meal. Ausa has been to my Passover Seder. I've been to her home, etc., etc. This is the making of not only dialogue, but interfaith friendship. Next. So this is a much smaller picture. You can see Sadhviji, you can see me, and the man dressed in white is Mohinder Singh. He is a Sikh leader, and of all things, he is the Sikh leader of the Sikh community in Birmingham, England. But he is an international Sikh leader and very, very well respected. And I don't know if you can tell by the background, we are there at the United Nations. We sat on a panel together. Next. Here we are in Abu Dhabi, and we are with a sheikh named Abdullah bin Baya. Bin Baya is the one who decided that the Muslim world should give equal rights to minority religions. Bin Baya is the one who says, I want Jews and Christians at my conferences. Bin Baya, now well in his 80s, is one of the great intellectual leaders of Islamic law, of Sharia. He's from Mauritania. For years, he taught in Saudi, and now he teaches at in Abu Dhabi, in the United Arab Emirates, where he is the head of their fiqh council, the head of their legal council. And he's one of the great Islamic leaders in the world, and I count it a privilege. I tease him all the time because I call him my rabbi. Can we have one more, Amanda? Are there more? Sister Simone Campbell. Some of you may know Simone by her other name because she is the leader of Nuns on the Bus. Simone realized this will tell you how savvy she is. She's not only a nun, she's an attorney, but she realized nothing would garner more media attention than showing up somewhere with a busload of nuns. And so anytime she wanted to fight in Congress because of the budget, or go to this town or that town where she felt there was prejudice or poverty, or they needed a soup kitchen, Simone would get the nuns on the bus, and her network would actually do the job. Here she is at the Jewish Theological Seminary, where she spoke for us 2 years ago, and she's just wonderful. If you have the opportunity to look up network or Google nuns on the bus, you'll read a spectacular story of how a group of nuns are determined, and because of their determination, managed to get a great deal done. One of my students is texting me, even as I'm talking about Simone, saying that her network is, quote, they are my favorite coalition partners. So indeed, they're wonderful to work with. Next, Amanda. This is the Multi-Faith Advisory Council of the United Nations. This is one of those cases, I think, where the photo speaks for itself. You can just look at the array of faces. You'll see now in the front row, Ausa Karam is there, my colleague Simona Cruciani, my colleague Faisal bin Muammar, and Sadviji. On the far right seated is Lopa Banerjee, the head of UN Women. It's just a wonderful, wonderful group of people who I'm proud to be part of. And people who know me know that I don't generally do humble. It's just not one of my virtues. But when I'm in the room with these people who feed millions and serve millions, I'm humble. So it's good for me too. Okay, next. And here we are at the United Nations on a panel. You can see my friend Ausa Karam next to me. The gentleman next to her is an African, but he's actually now an African American. He's an American citizen. I call him my little brother, Mohammed El Sanusi. We hug every time we see one another. He, with his children, have been to my Passover Seder. I say without any embarrassment, I love Mohammed El Sanusi. He is now working, of all things, for the Church of Finland, doing interreligious leadership training. And to Mohammed's right is the Undersecretary General, who I mentioned earlier, Dr. Adama Dieng, who I also count as a friend. Okay, do we have any more, Amanda? Wow. Again, here we are at the United Nations. My friend Sadviji is there. You can see Sheikh bin Baya on the other side. You see me trying to look tall behind Sadvi. And then right in the middle is the United Nations Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, who came to give us his blessing for the work we do. Next. And here I am at the Jewish Theological Seminary. You can see the JTS with Jim Young Kim, who was then the president of the World Bank. And he spoke at JTS and across the street at Union Seminary, again, to encourage us. I think it was a nice moment for him to be at the seminary that ordained his mom. Okay, next. Is there a next? And here I am at the United Nations. You can tell I'm in the well of the General Assembly. You see me down there, teeny, on the, is that the left of the picture, the right of the picture? I am speaking that evening for UN Women. I am speaking out against female genital mutilation and underage marriage. And for me, of course, it was a no-brainer to speak about that and to protest it. But I'm sure you're aware of the fact that in countries all over the world, girls are still being forcibly married at ages 12, 13, 14, 15, when they shouldn't be. And alas, there is female genital mutilation going on still in too many countries. And the United Nations is trying to ban it worldwide. And they asked would I be willing to lend my voice, and I was very happy to do so. Next. And I mentioned earlier that the Marrakesh Declaration, there I am in Morocco, speaking at the Marrakesh event. I'm speaking to a room of 250 Muslim leaders, and there are a handful, maybe 25 Christians mostly, and Jews who were there to bear witness, and they were kind enough to ask me to speak. Next. Once again at the United Nations, this time under the auspices of the delegation from Jordan. The man I'm sitting next to is a Melkite Christian. That is to say, his group of Christians in Jordan actually put themselves in service of the Pope, and his name, he's a priest. His name is Nabil Haddad. What he's most famous for is he founded and is the chair of the Interfaith Council of the Kingdom of Jordan. Amanda, more? I'm the guy in the black. Francis is the guy in the white. And you can see he's holding a book in his hand. Every time I have met Francis, I have pressed one of my books upon him. I don't know whether he reads them, but at least I can be sure they'll wind up in the Vatican Library. He is unbelievably cordial. Before he became Pope, he had co-authored one and only one book, and he was then the Archbishop in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and he co-authored the book with a rabbinic colleague there. So he has been dedicated to interfaith dialogue from his times in Argentina through today. And then we probably have another papal picture, right? Yes, there I am with Pope Benedict. I just want to say Pope Benedict at the time was in his 80s. He was much smarter than I. He's wearing a sombrero. It was boiling hot. My bald spot got sunburned. But he was also not only physically, temperature-wise, but emotionally, he was incredibly warm and lovely in his greeting, in chatting with me. He knew I was teaching at a papal university, and he engaged me for quite a bit. I also want to say that the first time I met Pope Francis, when we finished our chat, he said something that really caught me. He said, "Rabbi, pray for me." And so I do. I pray for Pope Francis because I think he is one of the great leaders in the world. Next, are there any more, or have we run the gamut? We've almost run the gamut. There I am, may he rest in peace, with the King of Saudi Arabia, King Abdullah. King Abdullah of the House of Said was an absolute monarch. He, and it sounds so odd to say this about a king of Saudi Arabia, he was a reformer. He appointed women to his cabinet, and he made a vow to spend $50 million to build an interfaith center. And he went to the United Nations. This is actually the evening he's at the UN. And he has spent that money to build the Kaisid, which I talked about earlier, that is now housed in Vienna. And he literally put his money where his mouth is, built an interfaith center, and tried to move slowly but surely Saudi Arabia into the interreligious dialogue world. And I first met him when he had an interreligious gathering in Madrid as well. So he has done it repeatedly, and I hope his spirit rests in peace. Next. I think we've done it. I'm looking at the chat, and I hope we have time for maybe a few minutes of questions. Sarah, are you checking out questions? Are there?
I don't see any questions yet. Does anybody
Type
have
away.
any?
Type away. Janet, if you have a question, type it into the chat.
She's typing.
Janet Rifkin herself. Welcome back to Kent, Janet. Who else has questions? Betty Krasny probably has a question. Oh, and I see Lisa Jenkins is on the call. Lisa, I gave you a shout out earlier. I'm so glad you're with us.
Janet, if the chat's usually down at the bottom of the screen, if you move your mouse, it should a little, she says.
Is it possible, could we ask people to maybe also, I don't know if you can see them all, maybe raise their hand if they want to ask a question, although you have to actually ask a question, not give a speech. Oh, right there, Leah Goldstein. Can you see her? Very important. She's my cousin. So.
Except the name is Poland.
Leah, yes. I go back to my childhood. Leah, Poland.
Okay. All this was wonderful. However, we're dealing with major currently problems with different groups of people. Have you taken a stand? I know you're probably trying to avoid it on this wonderful program, but what is happening with you particularly, or with Jews vis-a-vis Black Lives Matter?
I have taken a stand. I think Black Lives very much matter. I actually see that she sent a message in. Lisa Jenkins, an African-American minister, is on the call, and she has been one of my partners. Lisa and I have joined a group of clergy doing study groups in Chicago. I have to remember them all. Atlanta, Seattle, and New York. Lisa is the minister who I worked with, and I bless you, Lisa, for having given COVID-19 testing to her congregants. Lisa has been on programs with another JTS rabbi, Jan Urbach, and served on panels. I'm just blessed to have such a good colleague. She is one of many African-American colleagues I work with. And yeah, Leah, I want to be very, very clear. Black Lives Matter, and the Jewish community, which decades ago had wonderful alliances with the African-American community back in the days, 50 years ago, of Heschel and King. And I want to say proudly that the Jewish Theological Seminary gave an honorary degree to the Reverend Martin Luther King, just as we more recently gave an honorary degree to John Lewis. We want to resurrect that kind of a coalition so that the Jewish community and the Black community work together to bring so much social justice that is just crying out to be addressed.
Burt, Janet made a remark. It says, the discussion between theology and ideology under Vatican II. Perhaps you can address that.
I'm not entirely sure what Janet is driving at.
She's adding something here.
Yes, she leans forward, and then maybe after Janet, we can get Lisa Jenkins, who I would like to unmute her so she can have a word too. But Janet, she's typing. One is political. So for most, it's actually a very keen question. The reality, I think, is, and I'm looking at Yechezkel and I'm looking at some of the other dialoguers, that we don't make a lot of distinction between the political and the spiritual. Those two things overlap. When things matter deeply, spiritually, that's when we're ready to say, then we must act politically to make sure it happens. So we do get our hands dirty with politics. We won't always agree on politics. I recently, around COVID-19, did a op-ed and a, what do they call those things on it? Podcast. Thank you. My wife had to tell me what it's called. A podcast. And I did it with my brother, Mohammed El Sanusi, but also with an evangelical Texan minister, Bob Roberts. Now, every time Bob Roberts sees me, he tries to convert me to Christianity. And every time he does that, I say, Bob, I know you do it because you love me. And I'm not converting, but I'll do my best to love you. We disagree about everything. But one thing we had to be able to agree on, and did, was that we joined together to urge religious communities to listen to doctors. Don't go to church. Stay home. Wear a mask. Wash your hands. Listen to doctors. Now that's political, and we did it at the World Economic Forum. But it was necessary for us to do it. When the Muslim ban came out, I joined together with a lifelong Republican who was a Mormon to write an op-ed opposing the ban, because Jews and Mormons have been persecuted in this country. So we know that we have to speak up together. And these are the ways we stand together. And quite frankly, they are political. Can we get Lisa Jenkins unmuted so she can say a word?
Hi there. Can you hear me?
I can.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. First of all, thank you so much. This has been so amazingly enlightening, and I am just grateful to be here on this call to hear and see and witness all that you've done. You've done some amazing things, first of all, obviously, but I want to know, in your opinion, with all of the experiences that you've had and the individuals that you've met and the organizations that you've been a part of, with where we stand right now today, what is it that you think can be done to move the needle? What group, is there a particular group, or is there a particular coalition that can be, that can come together, or that is already formed? For instance, the United Nations, many people, you know, this is not what I'm saying, but there are many people that feel that the UN at this point is not effective in actually making headway towards moving the needle in a profound way. Can you speak to that as far as organizations or people, individuals that can help us at this extremely pivotal point in humanity, not just Black Lives Matter, but I think it's a human issue that we're dealing with?
So thank you very much for that question. And I'm going to put it together with what Janet said, because I think that for the last 3.5 years, this country has had leadership that has worked to teach hate and divide us. And so one thing I think that is, for me, a religious obligation, and obviously there will be people who will disagree, probably even people on this call. But one thing I think we need to do is get everybody out to vote. You may not vote the same way I'm going to vote, but vote. That is one of the most essential things we have to promote Black Lives Matter, to promote minority rights, to promote social justice. And everybody has that privilege. Vote, and make sure everybody indeed does have that privilege. The other thing I want to say is that as I've gotten older, by the way, Lisa, you were very nice. You said you've done so much stuff. I know Lisa well enough to say that that's her polite way of saying, boy, you're really an old man. But one of the things I've learned over many years, not only in the dialogue world, but just I'm 68 years old, is that I've come to appreciate the myth of Sisyphus. Every morning I get up and I roll that rock up the hill. And when I wrote, I actually talked about it with a Turkish colleague of mine, a Turkish Muslim colleague, and he interviewed me, and I talked about the Sisyphus example. And I sent the interview to my children. And my son emailed me and said, yes, you pushed the rock up the hill, but try and remember what would happen to the world if you weren't pushing the rock up the hill. Then, after the 2016 elections, I was really despairing. And I wrote my kids that the rock had just gotten a lot bigger and the hill a lot steeper. And my 32-year-old son wrote me and said, yes, but we're pushing with you.
Wow.
And I think that's all we can hope for. I'm looking at the call and seeing younger colleagues, students, my cousin Madison, right? People who are younger. And I know, I mean, I'm seeing students who work with me in the Milstein Center. And I know we can count on them to push with us. And so we just all got to push that rock together. There's no easy answer. There's no one organization. I go to bed tired every night. I get up tired every morning, and I do my best to push the rock. And I'm inviting everybody on this call to do the same.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I just want to personally thank you for what you've done. I did hear you mention the collaboration that you had with our church. We were able to test almost, I think it was like 800 people almost, or something like that. A number that far surpassed what we thought we were going to test. And not just in our church, but I want to emphasize it was the community. And so because of the collaboration and because of your good work, it was outside of the walls of the church, and it was the actual community that we were able to reach into. So thank you for allowing us to go outside of our walls and have an impact in the greater Harlem community.
And I will say what I wrote to you as a thank you, which is God bless you, Lisa Jenkins. Do we have time, Sarah, for maybe one more question?
I don't see anything else on the chat. Does anyone have a question? Jim, are you saying goodbye? You have a question.
You have to unmute, Jim.
Go.
Yep.
There we go.
There we go. Okay. Burt, I just want to thank you for stepping up tonight and imparting a great deal of your wisdom to us. And thank you so much for all you're doing to make this world a better place in these horrendous times. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. I took off my headset so that my wife can hear this too. My wife spends as much time with Jim as co-president of the library as she does with me. So I'm especially grateful to hear your thanks, Jim.
Thanks again, Burt.
I saw Norman also has a question.
I'm sorry?
Norman also has a question. Norman
Goldstein? Norm, you have to unmute.
Or you can type it in the chat.
Norman, if you want to ask a question, you have to unmute your computer or type it in the chat.
I'm trying to help with unmuting. You can type it in the chat also, Norman.
At the bottom of the screen, there's if you put hover your mouse, there you go down, it'll say chat.
All right. If we can't get it now, Norman, he knows certainly how to reach me privately, and you can ask your question then, because you're still muted.
It looks like he's typing.
Oh, typing? Okay. Thank you for the correction, Lisa Jenkins. 589 people tested.
Janet? I have to unmute, Janet. There you go.
Burt, going forward, if we email you some questions, or because I think everybody is thinking about what you said, would you be available to make a few responses?
Of course I would. I would be
because there was a
honored
lot to think about.
I would be honored and delighted. Janet is a co-conspirator with me here in Kent. We've sat on many committees together, and you know, every community has what to do. Here in Kent, I think we serve together on Kent Affordable Housing. We serve together on giving away charitable money for a foundation. And we're delighted to learn that there are dozens of local organizations in our little town that are serving the community. And I know that's true of every town. So if you can't reach me, and you can find me on the Jewish Theological Seminary website, I'm sure if you write to Lucy or Sarah Marshall, they will forward your email, and I'm happy to engage you, and I'm happy to try and get you involved as well.
Burt, can you hear me now?
Now we can hear Norman Goldstein.
Okay, my question is, I admired all that you're doing with professionals in the field of Muslim outreach and interfaith. How much is really being done on the grassroots level? All of the conferences you were mentioning and all of the meetings were with professionals, but on the down-to-earth situation, how much is really being done?
So first of all, thank you, Cousin Norman. Norman is an activist. He lives in suburban Maryland and has probably been the chair or president of every Jewish organization in the greater Washington area. He certainly does his work on the ground. So he's asking a question right from his own experience. I will say, Norm, that if I go to an international conference, it tends to be leadership. But for instance, when I was at the 96th Street Mosque, there were 1,000 Muslims there. They were the regular, I don't know what you call them, parishioners? They were the regular attendees of that mosque. When I went to the Islamic Society North America convention and there were 30,000 Muslims, that wasn't just the imams and the leadership. Those were people who have a strong Muslim identity, Muslim American identity, who wanted to learn more about Islam and then made a point to come to my session to hear about Judaism as well. So I do have opportunity. When Sandy and I were we in Qatar? And one of the bellboys said to Sandy as he was giving her her suitcase, "I'm so privileged to meet a member of the chosen people." Well, when you get an entree like that, that's just begging for dialogue. So we have had lots of opportunity, and I do have to say that the leadership is working very hard, whether it's Muslims, Christians, or Jews, to bring this message to the people in their congregations and to encourage them. Not every leader, not every congregation, but little by little, we're making progress. I can tell you in my own conservative movement, 20 years ago, I sent out a survey of rabbis asking what they were doing to engage the Muslim community. And I got very few replies. Now it's pro forma for rabbis and communities, just like they'll have a Thanksgiving dinner with the local church. They will do an Iftar dinner or even a Jewish breakfast dinner with the local mosque. The tide has turned, and I think it is there among the, not just the grass tops, but the grassroots.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, I want to thank you and Lucy once more for giving me this opportunity to get the word out. And thank you, Janet, for suggesting. I really encourage everybody, send me email, and we will dialogue ourselves. If I'm in for a dialogue, I'm in for a dialogue with all of you too. And hopefully we can all get involved in this work.
Well, thank you for joining all of us, Burt. It was a really interesting presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.